Welcome to A Waldorf Journey, a podcast for teachers, parents, students, and people who are passionate about Waldorf education. I'm Meredith, and I'm glad you're here. I spent nearly 20 years in the Waldorf classroom, and I learned a thing or two about teaching in all those years, and some of those lessons were not easy. Through it all, though, I've come to the conclusion that there's nothing better than Waldorf for nurturing thoughtful human beings who love to learn. You can find show notes for this episode, along with a lot more useful content on my website, awaldorfjourney.com. While you're there, sign up for the newsletter to receive updates about new content on the blog and the podcast. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram as A Waldorf Journey. Now let's get started. Hi, welcome, and I'm really happy to be talking to you today because I wanted to dive in and talk about a block or two and just really look in a more in-depth way at some of the curriculum topics that we study. So I thought we could talk about the physiology and anatomy blocks that we do in 7th and 8th grade. And what has brought this to my mind recently is a couple of things. One, I was talking with someone about their child who is an alumni, and we were talking about like the aspects of their learning experience that they remember, and we kind of had a chuckle together over actually how little her daughter remembers of various things. And so the mother was saying something about like some block that, she knew that we taught, and that, she was saying, oh, well, didn't you learn about that in, 3rd grade or whatever? And the child was like, didn't really remember any specifics about it. And, this mother was like, in a way that's kind of concerning, here we put all of this effort and care and attention and money into this, incredible education, only to have our children like not remember any of it. And so that, can be like concerning. But, what I reassured this mother with was this idea that like, this is just the plight of the elementary school teacher, and that we know as we're going through all of this effort that we're putting into these beautiful lessons, like just a fraction of it, or maybe just a glimpse of it is going to be remembered by these students. And I don't know about you, but what I remember when I think about when I was in, 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, really, I just have vague glimpses of memories from those years. And I think that's common. We don't really remember the exact curriculum or the exact lessons that we experienced in those years. And I think that's fine. And what we need to know as teachers is what we're doing, rather than providing children with everything that they'll need to know about botany or rocks and minerals or zoology or whatever it might be. What we're really doing is like tending fertile soil, and that we are creating in them a warm memory, a feeling of warmth towards a subject, so that when they come back to it, when they are ready to learn facts and information that they are going to remember for the rest of their lives, it will have fertile soil. Those ideas will be planted in a place where they already have a warmth towards the subject, towards the topic. And I think that it's really easy for teachers to remember that this is the case, especially in the lower grades. We can really know that like children aren't going to remember the exact phonics lessons that they experienced, or, whatever it might be. Like we know that those children are, our memories of that time are very, spotty, and that's fine. That's as it should be. But it's a little bit harder for teachers to grasp that we are still doing that work of tending the soil, and not expecting that students are going to, retain all of the information that we're teaching to them it's harder for us to remember that in the upper grades, particularly when we get into the sciences. And when we teach the science curriculum, it is, we feel like, oh, this is facts. This is information that children need to know and digest and learn about. And they seem capable of doing so because they're older. They're middle schoolers now. They seem like they're just more like connected to the world and that they can hold on to those memories. And it's true. They can hold more information. And there are things that they do remember. I have had students come back to me and mention that they remember, particular lessons and things that we did in class. However, we're not expecting, we should not be expecting that when we teach them chemistry or physics or physiology or anatomy or any of those things, that the content of those lessons, the information, is what's going to live. That really what's going to live is the feeling that they have when they are experiencing the content. And so that's where our attention should go. And so that's a long way of getting to the point that that's why I wanted to talk about physiology and anatomy in the Waldorf school, because you could look, and this was another experience I had one time. I was sharing with a teacher that I was mentoring, some of the lessons and some of the work that I did in our physiology block. And, I shared when the sort of block outline of, what you teach and, going through all the specifics of digestive system, respiratory system, all of those things. We went through the content of the block, and she just said, well, what about this is Waldorf? What makes this Waldorf? And, she had a really good point. It's like, well, it's not the content itself that makes it Waldorf. Really, what makes it Waldorf is this idea that we are teaching this content from that perspective of just warming the soil and creating an experience rather than conveying information that they're going to grasp. So the information itself, yes, is the typical information you would find in a typical mainstream physiology or anatomy lesson book. That's there. It's still that same information. And if you've taught rocks and minerals or botany and any of those things, that is the case in those subjects as well, that really the content of the lesson is what you would typically find in any mainstream classroom. The difference is the way that it's taught and the recognition that we're teaching it through this feeling sense, and that we're teaching with our goal being to, warm the soil and to help the student build a feeling connection with the subject, not necessarily to remember the facts, because we know that's not what's going to happen. We know that what they will remember is how it felt, and they'll hold on to a warmth for the subject, not necessarily the information that they learned in the block. So with that in mind, all those things in mind, let's talk about a physiology and anatomy block, and what those things look like and how they fit into the context of the stream of natural history or natural science studies in the Waldorf school. So, which is a big topic. So I'm going to do a quick sort of look through the natural sciences and talk about how they fit and how they evolve through the grades. And then we'll focus in on these two blocks themselves. So first of all, and really what makes them Waldorf. So I'm not really going to get too detailed into the digestive system or bones and, the anatomy of the eye and all that. So I'm not going to talk about those things in terms of the what, but much more about the how. So first, let's talk about the science, natural sciences in the Waldorf school. And really, it starts in early childhood, right? When they watch a trickle of water go down a hillside through dirt, and they notice all of the things, the path that it takes and what happens as it's moving down. Like, that is a natural science lesson at its most sort of elementary basic level. And so that experience of doing that sensory experience, touching the water, feeling the air from outside, like, is it cold, is it warm, like, all of those things are a part of that natural sciences curriculum, going as far back as 3 years old. That's what they're experiencing. So that's where it starts. And then in grades 1 through 3, it really is, it's just a continuation of that. So they're experiencing stories and having direct experiences with nature and animals and plants. And so that's really where it still lives in this sort of story feeling way, without having a strong intentional curriculum or area of focus. It really exists in that realm through grade 3. And then, and you might even say that in the 3rd grade shelters block is a little bit of this, there's this idea that natural sciences aligns with this natural surroundings. And on Waldorf Inspirations, if you look at their website, they really talk about the natural surroundings curriculum, and that I think really aligns nicely with this. It evolves into a study of the natural sciences. So I think I would really recommend looking at what they have to say about, the study of natural surroundings and what that looks like in the lower grades. And then in 4th grade, that's really where we, first enter into our first, block of natural sciences, and that is the human being and the animal. And sometimes you hear it called zoology, and I think that people want to call it zoology when they want to make it sound like, oh, we're studying a science. But really, I prefer to call it this, the human being and the animal. Yeah, the human being and the animal, and that really keeps it in this realm, in the feeling realm, much more. So when we call it zoology, we kind of bring it into the abstract a bit more, and really it's true to the content. We're really, throughout that block, we are constantly relating the animals that we study back to the human being. And that throughout this natural sciences curriculum, you could think about the curriculum in that way, that we're really looking at connecting the human being to the plant and animal and natural world. So it really is this, we start with the animals, and then we'll look at the plants, and then rocks and minerals, and then we really look much more closely at the human being. And so anyway, let's just start with that. So so the human being and the animal, and really looking at the relationship between the human being and the animal. So then in 5th grade, we move on to study botany, and we talk about botany in the very same way. It's really the relationship of the human being to the plant. And we try to see, and we do this with the animals as well, we see what are the human-like qualities. So when we look at different plants, what aspects of the human can we relate those qualities to? And so it's less about how human beings maybe interact with plants, but how we can see plants as beings in the same way that we can relate to and have relationships with, in the same way that we have relationships with other human beings. And so, a lot of people, for a long time, people have talked about looking at the different plants as though they represent different phases of development in the human being. And I think that can be one way. I've talked with some teachers who, that doesn't resonate for them. And so, but I think it can be one way that you can look at it. So, for example, the idea of, the mushroom is like the baby, that it really stays close to its mother. It has this sort of, it doesn't, it's small. It has this protective gesture. So that's one, and you can kind of go through. Charles Kovacs does this in his resources, where he kind of goes through the plant kingdom and relates the different plants to the different phases of the human being. So I think that can be one way that you can look at doing that. And that is a pretty effective way of bringing this, comparison, and this drawing a line that makes the relationship between the human being and the plant pretty clear. But the next step is is geology and the mineral world. And again, calling it geology, even calling it plants botany, you could call it the plant and the human being. And geology, I preferred to call it rocks and minerals, because it just brings this abstraction when you're calling it a science. It is, sometimes people like to, because it makes it sound maybe a little more official and scientific. So, that's fine too, to do it that way. But to really hold on to this idea that in the teaching of it, we're really trying to bring relationship and feeling and humanness. And so if we can do that in the name of the block too, then I think that is most appropriate. But so yes, but in grade 6, and the 6th grader changes quite a bit. That 12-year change brings this greater objectivity, and they can kind of see things a little bit more, from the outside. And they really understand things through the lens of cause and effect. And so it's a little bit more appropriate to then study things just for the sake of themselves. So we do it a little bit less, I would say, when it comes to rocks and minerals, where we're constantly drawing that line back to the human being. I did find that my students still needed that connection, a human connection, to solely focus on rocks, because animals are so lively, and it's easy to connect with them as human beings. Plants a little less so, and rocks even less so. And so I really did find that my students needed something a little bit more human and living in order to feel connected with our rocks and minerals study. And so I told biographies throughout that block, and so that really stories about how different people, naturalists, have connected with the rocks, the world of rocks and minerals. And I did that in our botany block as well, and a bit in the human and animal. So anyway, that really kind of is the precursor to what comes after rocks and minerals. We've kind of explored the elemental world. And so now it's really time to return back to the human, and to look at the human through a more objective lens, and in a more scientific way. As much as we do that in a Waldorf school, in the elementary school, in a Waldorf school, we still want to keep it very human and relational and warm and in the feeling realm, as I was saying before. So what are the ways that we do that? So I'm going to talk just kind of more generally about both of these blocks, and how you can really infuse them with, humanness and connection and warmth. Whether we're talking about physiology or anatomy. And just to be clear, when we talk about those two different subjects, I remember I wasn't clear on this before I taught these blocks for the first time. Physiology, we're really talking about the systems, so the organs that, help us, stay alive. So the digestive system, the respiratory system, those things that really, contribute to our the reproductive system, all of those systems, the organs that are kind of, and you can feel that those are a little bit more living and warmth, have more warmth and more human than anatomy, which is, the bones and the muscles, and, which is a little bit more, like you could maybe draw the line between like the physiology is more like the plant world, and anatomy is more like the rocks, rocks and minerals. So you can kind of make that comparison a little bit. So it makes sense to me that we would start in 7th grade with physiology before moving into the more sort of solid or hardened, more abstract world of anatomy. So anyway, just to know how those two sciences sort of differ and what we're talking about when we talk about physiology and anatomy. So how to bring this warm humanness into both of those blocks. First of all, to talk about like integrating the arts, and that is a huge part of everything that we do in a Waldorf school, but that immediately brings a human and warmth quality into it. So we're not looking at photographs of real live, we're doing artistically beautiful drawings that represent these things that we're studying. So, and students engaging with those drawings, they can really represent in a much more tangible way the human body's relationship with the various systems, because that really does need to come in an artistic way, because it's not something that is so visible to the eye, immediately apparent to the eye. So, doing these beautiful drawings of the digestive system, and then even in 8th grade, drawings of various bones and the skeleton, and I maybe would do just a part of the skeleton, so we don't anyway. That seems like a good way to go, so we're being accurate. Okay, so there's that's one way, is these artistic renderings of the subjects that we're studying. Next, to really talk about storytelling and imagery. And, we can do that through, there are opportunities for stories in every single block, whether you're sharing, an anecdote of your own like direct experience of an awareness of hunger, or an awareness of some aspect of your circulatory system, or something like that. Like you just notice that your hands get cold all of a sudden, and like there are all kinds of little like anecdote like events or stories that we can be sharing throughout the block that really just bring some warmth and humanness to it. But we can also use metaphor and comparisons to just create a much more living picture of the different systems and of the anatomy. So, like, for example, you can describe the circulatory system as this vast network of rivers that run all throughout the body, and like depicting it. And so that's one example of a metaphor that you might use, but I'm sure there are like countless others where just like planting the image of a river that just like goes out to all of the different aspects and different people living in different places, or the different cells that need nourishment, and that that the circulatory system is that river, in the same way that there can be life at the ends of all of the different rivers. The circulatory system is the river system for the human body. So, and I'm sure, like I said, there are just lots of others. If I, lived into each system a little bit more, I'm sure I would come up with some other ideas of metaphors that can really tell the story. And when you get just descriptive in these narratives, and they just really come to life much more, and students can have that living connection to it and develop that warmth, so that when they come back and they learn about the details later, it's lively, and they're interested and curious and thoughtful. The other thing, of course, is to think about experiential learning. And there are so many. I would say I mean, probably in my experience of teaching both of these blocks, the experiential learning, just like there are so many opportunities. And, right away, as the lesson planner that I am, I think right away of like, okay, so maybe each week you're going to make sure that you have, a metaphor, that one of the things that you've talked about has been brought in terms of a metaphor. Another thing that you're bringing, comes in an experience. So like looking for ways to incorporate these different ways of connecting with and warming up the subject throughout your week and throughout the block. So lots of different possibilities there. But in terms of experiential learning, I can just, so many examples come to mind, but I'll just mention a couple that I remember when we were learning about the digestive system, and I didn't, open up with like just explaining and talking to them about what the digestive system was. I just said, okay, so this is an apple. And it was like, at the end of the lesson. So like right before snack time. And, so I pull out an apple and I just, talk about like how I just know that these, apples, it's my favorite kind of apple because they're just really juicy and sweet, so that when you cut into it, like you can just hear the crispness. And even just in that narrative, just in explaining that, they're already like, noticing and feeling, oh, an apple. And then when I cut it, and really what I'm getting, that I cut the apple and I smell it, and I I start to describe it, and I might even take a bite. Of course I would share it with them afterwards, but the lesson in that is the question: at what point did your body start preparing for a digestive experience? And so probably the minute I started talking about a sweet, delicious, crispy apple, your mouth started watering, and, to really, and so, I might do it again on the next day and ask students to really pay attention to what was happening with their bodies. Like, did their mouth start to water? Did they start to like almost taste what it was? Could they smell it? And then they were kind of tasting it a little bit. So that was, I mean, just really, I remember such an experience for them of the digestive system. And then the other one that comes to mind was in our anatomy block, and it really overlapped a lot with physics, and we were studying pressure in 8th grade, and we did this calculation of surface area and pressure, and how much like pounds per square inch our feet were experiencing. And so just like what's involved in doing that is the tracing the footprint and calculating how many square inches each person's footprint, your footprint is, and then dividing out like what does that mean, how much, and then having an experience of pounds per square inch. So when all that weight is focused on a high heel, stiletto heel, then the pressure is much stronger. But if it's distributed, then so maybe that would come much more in your physics lesson. But there is, there are constantly, just throughout, even in the anatomy as well, there are lots of experiences where you can just bring an experience of the physical body in a way that is experiential. And, I remember having them write the names of bones on their bodies, and just like looking for ways to engage them with activity and experience. And then the last thing I really wanted to mention was in terms of this, like how we keep it human and alive and warm, is this idea of focusing on health and balance. And this seems harder, or this seems easy, but it's actually like more difficult than you would imagine, because it's just kind of a fact that we tend to not notice our digestive or our systems or aspects of our physical bodies unless there's something wrong. And it's when there's a problem that we're like, oh wait, okay, there's something going on here. And so they tend to, I remember my students would tend to like want to know, okay, well, what happens when it's not going right? Like they could understand the healthy version by having an understanding of the illness. And so it's tricky because they're actually curious and hungry for that information. They want to know, like, what does it mean when somebody has, or is gluten free, or what does it mean when somebody has an allergy to something, or what does it mean when various illnesses that are out there, like what they want to understand and know more about them. And so you want to support them with that and help them and give them information, but you do always want to bring back to the healthy picture. And so you don't want to get too stuck. I remember in 7th grade, especially, my students, it was very funny. I allowed them to do honors projects in 7th grade. And so if they were just curious about something and wanted to like deepen their knowledge and take on, some additional aspect of work, then they could take on an honors project. And invariably throughout 7th grade, it was kind of funny that they studied diseases and illnesses like almost throughout. I remember when in our history block, there were people who what they wanted to study for their honors project was the plague, and they just wanted to really dive deeper into what was going on with the plague. But then it happened throughout. So I remember somebody did learned about cystic fibrosis for an honors project. But anyway, it just kept coming up that they were really curious about the illnesses that happened, and that it took effort and energy to continually to bring it back to the healthy ideal, and to picture and to also build trust and confidence in the body's capacity for, self-regulation and healing. And so we did talk about homeostasis and how the body is really trying to equalize and to create balance, and that is, an important aspect to understand, and that when something goes out of balance, the body has to work to bring it back into balance. So those were ways that we really brought this sort of human connection to these sciences that maybe sound, can be cold and abstract, but really our job as teachers in the elementary school is to warm things up and to make them human and tend that fertile soil. Yeah, I'm just looking at my notes to make sure that I've said everything that I really wanted to mention. But yeah, I think it is. And really just to leave with this picture of, yes, we are like building this, warm, fuzzy feeling about the subjects that we're teaching. And, what's in that is to build this appreciation for one's own body and, the intelligence and wisdom that we all have within our bodies, and to recognize that our bodies are really a part of nature, and that we're not separate from it, and that we're part of a, living, rhythmic, connected system. And just to understand how the whole system connects together is just part of bringing that warmth and that good feeling, that feeling sense to the study of physiology and anatomy. Okay, so that's my little rundown, my conversation about studying physiology and anatomy. Thank you so much for watching. And if you are watching this on YouTube, then I would love it if you would leave a note in the comments. Have you taught physiology and anatomy? Were there experiences or activities or maybe biographies or stories that you told that were really resonant for your students? I'd love to know about that, and to share in the comments with other teachers who may come across this. I would love it if you would share. We're just growing on YouTube, so share things out with your networks and let people know that we're out here. And if you are listening on your favorite podcast app, then as you know, we've been here for a while. So thank you so much for listening. And you can always check me out. I'm on Instagram and Facebook as A Waldorf Journey, and you can check out my website, awaldorfjourney.com, where I have curriculum materials and resources to support teachers and just, make this big job more sustainable. So thanks so much for watching and have a great day.